Speaker, I'm honoured to have the opportunity to speak to the procedural rules that govern Canadian democracy. And while it may not be the most exciting or controversial subject matter, these rules affect all aspects of the creation of law in this country. Yet they are rarely spoken of or acknowledged in our day-to-day dealings in this House. Since being elected, I've had the opportunity to speak on a number of diverse but incredibly important subjects, ranging from softwood lumber to assisted death, from the Energy East pipeline to the suicide crisis in Ottawa-Piscat. And while I may not be a subject matter expert or a so-called procedural nerd, I look forward to the opportunity to contribute to the betterment of democracy, building upon the work of the many great parliamentarians who came before me. In preparation for today's debate, I studied some of the speeches my colleagues have made in the past. There was plenty of material to draw from because, as you know, Mr. Speaker, this House is required to review its own standing orders at the beginning of the first session of any new Parliament, between the 60th and 90th day, according to Standing Orders 51-1. I'm confident, Mr. Speaker, that all my colleagues in the House here today know of this standing order. So unlike some of the speeches in the past, I will spare this House the same lecture they've heard dozens of times before. However, I would like to talk about some areas that I believe would lead to improvement. Let's talk about something that I feel the standing order sometimes fails to do. Mr. Speaker, healthy debate is a cornerstone of our society. It is the basis for democracy and the foundation of freedom of speech. So why is it here in this place, the very pinnacle of our democracy and the safe haven for true and intelligent debate, do we hear time and again regurgitated talking points and constant repetition? Traditionally, as our honourable colleague from the Yukon mentioned, no member of Parliament in this place was allowed to have notes at his or her desk. This is meant to be a place for somber thought, for ideas and opinions to flow and grow naturally from the Speaker's own mind. We were elected here to represent our constituents, Mr. Speaker. We were elected upon the basis of our ability to convey their wishes and concerns. How can we do so when we're simply reading and rereading the same talking points, which all of our fellow colleagues have already read? The following is an excerpt from the House of Commons Rules of Debate. Rules respecting relevance and repetition are difficult to define and enforce. The rule against repetition can be invoked by the Speaker to prevent a member from repeating arguments already made in the debate by other members or the same member. The rule of relevance, on the other hand, is used to keep a member from straying from the question before the House or committee. I would like to see more scrutiny when it comes to debate in the speeches we hear in this place, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am guilty as charged on this one. I think we all are. It is very easy to let the passion of debate fuel a rant or lead a member down a path that they may not exactly lead to the point or may not be part of the point or topic of debate, but rather simply a button pushed, an errant comment made, or simply it's the fact that we have this beautiful venue, a beautiful soapbox, if you can, that we oftentimes take for granted and use it as our free will. I would like to see the members encouraged to write and create their own material. And I would also like to see less reading from notes while in this holy chamber. Now, as the previous member spoke and he used my line before I did, I realize and understand the hypocrisy of this statement because I'm reading from my notes as well. Cue the laugh line. But I believe the best speeches and interventions from all sides are those that are spoken from the heart, fueled by passion and knowledge on a particular issue, not simple talking points. I am passionate about this place, and I respect all who come through those doors. And I'd like to stress the fact that I feel honored each and every day that I've had the opportunity to this point and beyond to walk up these stairs and work with all members of this House. I believe that the people who elected us, Canadians, deserve the very best from all of us and from the institutions from which we serve. Therefore, I'd like to see the rules on debate improved and enforced. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to speak about accountability. The tabling of documents, Mr. Speaker, is currently something that only ministers or parliamentary secretaries acting on behalf of a minister can do. I think it would serve this place well if all members were allowed to table documents. There are safeguards already in place to prevent unnecessary documents from being tabled. If this government, who champions itself as an open and transparent government, is truly wanting to be open, truly wanting to be transparent, then they shouldn't be afraid of any documents being presented before this House. Mr. Speaker, as I'm sure you are aware, because of recent events involving a minister and a limo receipt, the Speaker of this House was unable to view receipts before ruling because they were not officially available. There was simply no mechanism for the opposition to put them before the House, other than unanimous consent, which, of course, given this topic, was unlikely. In that same light, Mr. Speaker, I think I can speak, and I'm sure all of my colleagues feel the same, that take-note debates offer the rare ability to talk about the issues that are pertinent. In this place, it would be beneficial to the Canadian people to allow the official opposition to call a take-note debate twice during each session, and allow the third party to call a take-note debate once during each session. This would provide the opposition parties and their constituents in their riding who they represent more opportunity to debate issues of importance to them. This could be done with little to no impact on time allocated for government orders. This would also alleviate pressure on the government to grant take-note debate requests, as they could simply tell opposition parties to use one of their days allocated. Mr. Speaker, I think we can all agree that there is a certain amount of sacrifice we make in undertaking our roles as parliamentarians. We signed up for that, knowing full well those demands. We see our families less, Mr. Speaker. This is a simple fact. Some of us are lucky enough to have our families close at hand, while others spend weeks on the opposite side of the country. I, like our member, honourable colleague from the Yukon, have one of the largest and most difficult travel schedules. But, Mr. Speaker, it's a great thing that I love airports and airplanes, and I do make my way back every week to see my constituents. We are away from our loved ones, husbands, wives, sons and daughters, grandchildren, and all those who are close to our hearts. This is why I've come to appreciate the new arrangement whereby some votes have been taken immediately after question period, instead of at the end of the day. I think this is something the House should look into making a permanent function. It is, indeed, better use of our time. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to talk about the calendar. In the very same light, as I mentioned previously, I'd like to suggest that we settle the House calendar for the following year in June, rather than waiting to September. Waiting until just before the House resumes causes an unnecessary rush and takes away from the process itself, Mr. Speaker. Recently, I used a comparison of rushing a budget process without thorough review and consideration. The budget is likely going to miss something or have serious complications in it. How can we expect to fully comprehend or understand the implications of the calendar when we're putting it together in such a hectic and rushed way? I believe it would better serve this House, and indeed all Canadians, if we're to begin this process much earlier. As I'm sure you know, Mr. Speaker, our constituencies are never adjourned, and the responsibilities that come with representing our constituents are constant and an ever-beating heart. The more time in advance we have to study our schedules will allow us to better prepare for the coming months and ultimately better serve our constituencies. On this very same note, Mr. Speaker, we are in a 24/7 business. While our offices may close for long weekends, holidays, special occasions, the lives and concerns of those who elected us continue every day. The Liberals have proposed a shortened work week, and I do not support this, and I believe it sends a wrong message, Mr. Speaker. The hardworking friends and families in my riding at Cariboo Prince George expect me to work a full day, a full week, to represent them to the fullest, giving ourselves a long weekend every week under whatever title or reason the Liberals will offer is wrong. We all signed up knowing the demands that came with this incredible opportunity. The responsibility falls on all of us to manage our time and schedules better. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I think it's clear that I have many suggestions. As a new member of Parliament, I'm eager to continue developing my procedural skills in this place, and I vow to continue to speak with passion, resolve, and sincerity, and I will continue to do my very best to serve the good people of my beautiful riding, Cariboo Prince George, a region and a group of people and constituents I am so deeply proud of. So in closing, I'd like to end my words with the words of someone else, one of the very best men to have stood in this place, Mr. Speaker, Sir John A. Macdonald said, "A new member requires the experience of his very first session in the House to teach him how to hang up his overcoat and to take his seat in a manner befitting a gentleman." With that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say thank you.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Costa Bay Central, Notre Dame.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague. Just a couple notes. Totally agreeable on the fact that you have the calendar set well before than what we have right now. I think June was the month that he mentioned. At the very least, for considering we spend so much time away from families, being able to plan that much further ahead is essential. So I totally agree with him. The shortened work week, I'm open to. I mean, we do work long hours, Monday to Thursday. There's an argument for that. I'm not totally convinced that we should go to the shortened work week, but I'm led to believe that in places like where we come from, he has well, his travel is worse than mine, quite frankly, because he goes all the way through British Columbia. I go to Newfoundland, but nevertheless, we both have the same time in airports and airplanes. But I guess if you use the attitude that, we all knew what we were getting into to do this, then nothing would really change. One of the things that should probably change is looking at voting and so many hours we spend here up and down voting. Most international members of parliament and politicians who come here are always fascinated when they tell me, why do you vote that way? Why do you still vote that way? It was something we delivered in the 19th century and haven't changed. I'll leave it at that for now, but I just want to get his comments on that. Some of the most important things that he would change.
Caribou Prince George.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm probably one of the worst ones to ask on this because regardless of whether it was this career or this role that I have or previous roles, I'm a bit of a workaholic. I'm in the office at 7 a.m. And I'm usually one of the last ones to turn the lights off at night. And I do that whether it is a weekend or a Monday to Friday. It's just the way that I'm wired. But I do think, and I do thank my honourable colleague for, and the one honourable colleague from Yukon who brought up the electronic votes. I'm all for finding efficiencies and finding better ways of doing things. And I think that there are ways that we can manage our day-to-day schedules here in this House to be better and more effective for all Canadians. And if electronic voting is one that we would consider, I'd be interested in looking at that.
Some comments. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Speaker, I listened with great interest to my honourable colleague. I'm a little concerned about a lot of the focus in this House about making it easier for parliamentarians to get home. I mean, we do hard work, but our people send us here to be accountable. So my focus today is how do we make Parliament more accountable, more efficient, so that the people we represent know that they can trust what's happening here. I'm concerned because I read the mandate letter from the Prime Minister and I think it's fantastic in terms of the role that ministers must play in terms of starting to be more accountable in the House. But I notice, like with our Justice Minister, there's been a series of questions that are important to be answered. For example, questions about sending in lawyers to overturn the rulings in favor of residential school survivors, refusal to answer. Questions about whether or not the Site C dam met the legal obligations. These are questions for the Justice Minister to have a minister of such an important portfolio not bother to respond to such questions, to me, diminishes all the promises the Prime Minister is making about making this House more accountable. So I'd like to ask my honourable colleague, what does he think about making sure that when we have questions and responses, that those responses are actually credible to the question?
For Caribou Prince George.
Well, that's a great question, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable colleague from Timmins James Bay on that. Mr. Speaker, one of the greatest disappointments that I had when getting to this point is when, and again, I'm not talking about previous governments past because I wasn't part of that, but when you have a minister, you've got hard questions being asked of all of the ministers, of the Prime Minister, and rather than even make eye contact during the time of the question, it is deferred to a parliamentary secretary who then regurgitates the speaking points, or we have a minister that will stand up to speak to something very important about their file that they've been entrusted with, and they have to read talking points that absolutely have no relevance to the question being asked. And so I too, as I'm sure most of the colleagues on this side of the House, would rather see more accountability with the ministers and not defer to the parliamentary secretaries.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Scarborough Agincourt.
Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable friend from Caribou, Prince George, for his contribution to the debate. And I simply want to encourage all colleagues today to be less partisan today. This is, I think, the one day that we collectively as colleagues have an opportunity to ask ourselves whether the standing orders, the rules that conduct the operation of the House of Commons and the committees is appropriate, whether we need changes. And this is our opportunity to put, as members of Parliament, individually and collectively, on the table the important issues of the day. I'm going to go to simply, you raised many important, my friend raised many important issues, and I'm simply going to get to simply one issue, and that was with respect to the Speaker's powers and the enforcement of the rules of debate. And would my friend be amenable to perhaps expanding those powers other than simply under the current system, which is to name a member if they were out of order?
The honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, I think, again, while the Speaker's chair is oftentimes, well, it's considered to be nonpartisan. I think it's important that as we move forward, that at all times that the Speaker is impartial and nonpartisan. At times it feels that maybe that is not the case in terms of debate and rules of debate. Sometimes probably unfairly so. That comment is probably unfairly so. It just feels on this side sometimes. But you know, I think, again, there are things that we can do, all of us, including the speakers. You do a great job, Mr. Speaker, so please don't take any offense to this. But I think the purpose of today is to find ways that all of us can be better serve Canadians, better serve our constituents. So thank you.